Hey, book lovers. Welcome to While I Read. As you see, I've brought back my special guest, Wilford Brimley. Or is it Tom Selleck?
No, I'm not going to try to sell you Quaker oats or diabetes supplies, nor even a reverse mortgage.
Just kidding. You may recognize my dad, Mark Harris. He's back to talk some more about Westerns. We filmed a lot of footage the other time, and it didn't all fit into the episode that I published. Plus, we just have more that we want to talk about with Westerns. Daddy always has more that he can talk about, right, Daddy?
Always.
So, we're going to talk a little bit more about Westerns. So, Daddy, that episode that we filmed together has been the most popular episode so far on this channel. Why do you think that is?
Well, when you bring on some top-notch talent, you can always expect to have an increase in viewership. That had a lot to do with it, I'm sure. Seriously, though, I don't know what the age demographic is of your viewership, but I'm guessing that there are a lot of people my age, maybe a little bit older, and maybe 8, 10, 12 years younger, who remember people like Rowdy Yates and Gil Favor and Nat Dillon and Miss Kitty and Festus Hagen and Doc and Lucas McCain. He was always one of my favorites, and the Rifleman, Chuck Connors. And those were some very popular shows back in the beginning in the late 50s through the middle 70s. And I think that a lot of people are yearning for that kind of movie to come back on, that kind of TV to come back on. And I think that's one of the reasons people were so interested in the episode that we did on Westerns.
I think you might be right, and I'm looking forward to talking about it more today.
Yep, me too.
You mentioned Matt Dillon, and I know Gunsmoke is one of your favorite series. Talk about that some.
As far as I'm concerned, Gunsmoke is the best show that ever came on television.
Better than Andy Griffith?
Better than Andy Griffith. Andy Griffith would be a close second in there, but to me, nothing compares with Gunsmoke.
Better than Friends?
I have never seen an episode of Friends.
Tom Selleck was in some episodes of Friends.
I didn't know that, but that doesn't redeem it as far as I'm concerned, as far as good TV is concerned. I don't exactly remember the time frame, and I might be mistaken in this, but to me, the epitome of good television was those Monday nights back in the late 70s, I guess, maybe middle to late 70s, when Gunsmoke came on at 8 o'clock and Monday Night Football came on at 9 o'clock. And as the fella said, it just don't get no better than that.
Daddy, what do you think caused you to become so interested in the Western genre?
Well, I've always been very interested in history. Went to college and actually majored in political science, but minored in history. Then got my master's degree in history. And I guess the Western genre just fits into history about as well as any other genre that you can think of, other than some of the political type stuff, which I'm very interested in too. And maybe we can talk about some of that in a later episode.
Definitely. Let's talk about some other movies. There are a lot of Western movies that we enjoy. We talked last time about John Wayne movies a lot. And we can talk some more about John Wayne movies today and about some other movies that we like. So what are some of your other favorite Westerns?
Well, I like, even though you don't like, the Clint Eastwood Westerns. Those came out in about the middle 60s when they started the spaghetti Westerns because they were filmed in Italy, I guess. And Clint Eastwood was the man with no name, they called him, because he didn't have a name in a lot of those movies. And there was a trilogy. It was A Fistful of Dollars, A Few Dollars More, and I think that The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly was part of that series. And The Good and the Bad and the Ugly is one of my favorite Westerns. Another one of my favorite Westerns that you don't like is The Outlaw Josey Wales. And I just really love that movie. I think it's a great movie, and I think that that he plays a great character in that movie, and you know there are some funny scenes in that movie and some serious scenes in it. So yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I think the Clint Eastwood movies are just a little too dark for me. Some John Wayne movies are a little dark for me, like
Yeah.
The Searchers. I know that's a great movie,
That's
probably his greatest movie.
his best movie.
And I don't like it because it's so sad and so dark. And I feel that way about all of the Clint Eastwood movies. They're very dark.
The Searchers had a very young Natalie Wood in it, in that movie, and it was a great movie. And that scene where he's filmed the camera inside the cabin and he's outside in the doorway, that's a very famous John
Iconic.
Wayne scene. Iconic, yeah, that's the word I was looking for. Thank you. Iconic John Wayne picture of him there. You know, some people that you probably don't always associate with Western movies that made some good Westerns. One of them was Jimmy Stewart. He made some real good Westerns, and Henry Fonda. And actually, they made one movie together that was real good. It was sort of funny. The name of it was the Cheyenne Social Club. Have you ever seen that one?
Is that the one where he inherits the brothel?
That's where the one where Jimmy Stewart inherits the brothel, and he's going to try to run that brothel. And I don't think he realizes that's what it is until he gets there. So yeah, that's a good movie.
That one is really funny. I like that one.
That's funny, and Henry Fonda plays a character that talks continuously. I think that's the way that the movie starts. They're riding across the plains, and every scene it shows, Henry Fonda is talking, and Jimmy Stewart's just listening. So yeah, there are good movies besides John Wayne, but John Wayne to me is still the king of the westerns. You know, that there were some before him, and I don't think any of those people that came before him eclipsed what he did in the westerns. I think he's the one that really made the western movie genre so very popular and so very successful. And some of the other movies, one of my favorites is Big Jake, and he plays that same character, that big, tall, strong gunfighter who knows where he's going and knows what he's got to do and knows how to do it. And a scene in that is when his grandson is kidnapped, and Maureen O'Hara
is his wife.
Is his wife, and he hadn't been to the home ranch or hasn't seen his wife. It doesn't say how long, but probably for a decade or more. And she makes a statement to the law enforcement officers that they're going to go try to rescue that kidnapped son. She says, "No, I don't think you can do it." She said, "This is an unpleasant business, and it's going to take a very unpleasant person to settle it." And the scene immediately then goes to John Wayne as being that very unpleasant person who comes to settle it, and he does. And there are some good scenes, and it's a good movie about where he rescues that grandson who he's never seen before.
Maureen O'Hara was in several movies with John Wayne. Mm-hmm. She was also in McClintock with John Wayne, which is not one of my favorites. It's funny. It has the physical comedy in it, but I guess it's just a little too silly for me. But a lot of people like McClintock. Yeah. She's also in The Quiet Man. Is that the name of it?
Yeah, the one about Ireland.
Yeah.
Where in Ireland,
yeah. And they're both very young very good movie. In that one. So
that's not a Western. That's another.
Just a good John Wayne movie.
Yeah. Another one is Rio Bravo. And we talked in the last episode about El Dorado. And Rio Bravo is actually the same movie with different people other than John Wayne in it. I think Dean Martin plays the drunk deputy. And Rick Nelson plays
the sidekick, the one that James Caan played in El Dorado.
The young sidekick.
And Rio Bravo came out in 1959, so it actually came out first. Yeah. And I think you've said that you like Rio Bravo better, but I've always liked El Dorado better. I've read that they wanted, or that John Wayne wanted to play the drunken sheriff in El Dorado, but they wouldn't let him. They didn't want him to play that character.
And also Walter Brennan is in Rio Bravo. He's Stumpy. Stumpy, is that what his name is? It's Stumpy, and he's an amusing character, very funny character. And you know, you could just go on down the line talking about John Wayne westerns, and you can start off with some of his very early movies. One of which, probably the most famous, is Stagecoach, which was along into the late 1930s, maybe 38 or 39. And there are some movies, as she mentioned, like The Quiet Man, that's not a western, but I suppose that his war movies from that era, in particular, the cavalry trilogy, they call it, Fort Apache, She Wore Yellow Ribbon, and Rio Grande. Those are three great movies. And one of the things that makes his movies so good, he always has such great supporting cast in there, and that's the case in those movies. So yeah, it's worth a watch. You want to go watch some good action movies with a good hero in them, go watch those John Wayne movies.
Talking about his supporting cast, the people we've talked about, Robert Mitchum, Maureen O'Hara, James Caan, and they're playing fairly minor characters in the movies. And these are just great actors in the movies.
Good actors, yeah.
Well, Daddy, what would you say are the characteristics of a good Western movie?
You got to have a hero, and you got to have a bad guy, and you've got to have a girl, in most of them. One of the things that makes some of those John Wayne movies, and also even the Clint Eastwood movies that were filmed out in Italy, is the landscape. But especially in those John Wayne movies, they filmed those movies in some iconic places, and you can go back and you can do a search on the internet about movie scenes, and you can see what it looked like then, you know, when they filmed the movie, and what it looks like now. So yeah, that's one of the characteristics of a good Western movie is the scenery. But the good versus evil, to me, is what makes a good Western. When you know that you got some bad guys, you got cattle rustlers, you got murderers, you got cheating gamblers, you got people that come in and jump claims and try to steal somebody's gold where they're mining their gold, but there's a good guy gonna come along, and the good guy's gonna make everything right. Matt Dillon is as good an example of that as anybody. You know, Matt Dillon was gonna come out in the end, and he was gonna outdraw whoever that was a bad guy, and everything was gonna turn out right. So those very simple components are what makes a good Western movie, and I guess, you know, you could probably put those same components in another genre and make a good movie of it. Although it would be hard, you know, in a lot of the other movies, the scenery is a New York City skyline, a Chicago street scene, or something like that. But to me, that Western scenery is just one of the components that makes them so good.
I'm waiting for you to make your joke that you always do when you talk about how you measure how good a Western movie is.
Well, the way I rate a Western movie or a Western book is, when you get through with it, how much horse manure and dead outlaws are laying around. I want to mention a few other authors that I have really enjoyed reading, and I'm still a page turner, by the way. And this man right here, A.B. Guthrie, who I doubt you've heard of unless you're a serious Western reader, but you've probably heard of a book he wrote back in the 40s, I think, called The Big Sky, and it's about Montana. And he followed that up with a book called The Way West. He wrote at least a trilogy, and maybe a quadrilogy. Is that a good word?
I don't know. I think you made that word up, but I like it.
Of books about taming the West, and this was about the third one, These Thousand Hills. But he actually won a Pulitzer Prize for The Way West. So that was a pretty serious writer. You know, that he was a novel writer. He wasn't a pulp fiction Western writer. He wrote serious novels. Another author that I like is Will Henry, and he wrote in the 40s and 50s, And he wrote under a couple of different names. I think his name actually was Henry Wilson Allen. And he wrote under Will Henry, and he wrote under Clay Fisher. And he wrote some real good books about Indians, one of which was From Where the Sun Now Stands, which was the story of Chief Joseph and the Nez Perce, if you pronounce it in the French, or Nez Perce Indians trying to get into Canada before the U.S. cavalry could catch them and put them on a reservation. And we've all heard the story about the Cherokee Trail and how tragic that was. Well, that story about these Nez Perce Indians getting caught just before they could get into Canada is just as tragic. And their leader, Chief Joseph, is the one that made that statement. He said, "From where the sun now stands, I will fight no more forever." The factual evidence that you can find in actual historical writings shows that his story follows the truth pretty closely. Another book that he wrote that I really enjoyed was called Bugles in the Afternoon, and it was about the Custer Massacre. And it was written from the point of view of a trooper in Major Reno's command who was with the 7th Cavalry but was not with the group that was massacred. And it follows the politics and the clashes between Custer and his commanders and between Custer actually and the President U.S. Grant. And it's a very good historical, what I call a historical reconstruction of the Custer Battle, Battle of Little Bighorn. The name of that is Bugles in the Afternoon. This author right here is a little bit more current, and he's from Texas, and
Elmer Kelton.
Elmer Kelton is his name. One of his best books is called The Time It Never Rained. And it was about a drought in Texas in the 1950s. And it followed a rancher who was trying to survive through about a 7-year-long drought, I think, that they had. And he made the statement one time, I read in an article about him in Progressive Farmer magazine, he said Louis L'Amour's characters are all 6'3" and invincible, while my characters are about 5'8" and a little bit nervous. So he wrote about more realistic people. And actually in that book, The Time It Never Rained, the rancher does not come out winning in the end like you would expect in a Western. The rancher finally succumbs to all of the problems that go along with a drought and trying to maintain his cattle herd and so forth during that time. Another good author is Elmore Leonard, and he's more famous for his crime novels. He wrote a bunch of them in the 60s and 70s, crime novels that were made into movies. I think Get Shorty. You ever heard of Get Shorty? I think that was a movie.
Didn't he do Pulp Fiction?
He might have. I'm not real sure. This particular book is a Western that he wrote, and the name of it is Valdez is Coming, and I think it was made into a movie. So my point there is that, yeah, Louis L'Amour is probably my favorite author, but there are a lot of others that I really like too, and some of them really, I don't know how to put it. I don't want to say they were better writers than L'Amour, but they wrote a little bit differently than L'Amour did.
More complex characters,
mainly more complex characters and more complex storylines.
Well, Daddy, thank you for coming on again to talk about Westerns. I definitely want to have you on again in the future, and who knows what we'll talk about then.
I'm looking forward to it. I can think of a lot of different things that we can talk about. But right now, you go clean your rifle while I read.